I slammed the front door shut behind me, the sound echoing through the narrow hallway of our apartment. My dad's shouting was still ringing in my ears. "Rahul, come back here right now," he had yelled, but I didn't look back. I never looked back. Dinner that night had been the usual tense affair. My father, eyes glued to the news, muttered about the decay of our culture, while my mother silently refilled our plates with dal and rice. It was the same damn routine every single night. He'd harp on about tradition, about what a real man should be. The air was thick with what wasn't being said. As I locked myself in my room, I sat on my bed and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The darkness outside my window matched the suffocating feeling in my chest. I switched on my laptop, hoping to find some escape online, when a message pinged from an unknown number. Unknown, hey, it's Arjun. Got your number from Geeta. You free tonight? Arjun. Just seeing his name made my heart skip a beat. We'd met at Geeta's birthday party a couple of weeks back. There was something about him confident, unapologetic. I typed back quickly. Me, yeah, where? Arjun, this new bar, the safe space, you know it? I didn't, but I wasn't about to admit that. Me, yeah, sure, what time? Arjun, 9. Come if you can. I glanced at the clock. 8:15. If I left now, I could make it. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror above my desk. My face looked pale, tired of hiding, tired of pretending. With a swift decision, I grabbed my jacket and slipped out of the apartment before my parents could question me. The streets were buzzing with life, but all I could focus on was the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I hopped on my bike, the cool night air hitting my face as I sped through the city. The safe space turned out to be a dimly lit bar, tucked away in a back alley. I hesitated for a moment outside, taking in the faint thrum of music leaking through the walls, then pushed the door open. Inside, it was like stepping into another world. The place was packed with people, laughter, and the kind of freedom that I had only dreamed about. I spotted Arjun at the bar, laughing with a group of people. When he saw me, his face lit up, and he waved me over. "Rahul," he called out, his voice rising above the music. "You made it." "Yeah, I did," I replied, trying to sound casual despite the pounding in my chest. He looked good, really good. His dark hair was messy in that intentional way, and his smile was infectious. He ordered us drinks, and we talked, or rather shouted, over the music. Every time he leaned in to speak to me, his cologne musky, with a hint of citrus, filled my senses. It was intoxicating. "So what do you do, Rahul?" he asked at one point, his eyes locking with mine in a way that made my pulse quicken. "I work in it," I replied, then immediately cringed at how boring that sounded. "But, I'm trying to figure out what I really want to do, you know." He grinned. "Aren't we all? But hey, at least you're here, right? That's a start." We clinked glasses, and I found myself laughing more than I had in years. But just as I was starting to feel comfortable, a group of rowdy guys barged in, making a scene. Arjun tensed beside me. I didn't know why at first, but then one of them shouted, "What the hell is this? A freak show." The whole bar seemed to freeze. Arjun grabbed my arm. "Come on," he said, pulling me toward the back. "Let's get out of here." "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep up. "Just some idiots," he muttered, leading me to a small side door. "But we don't need that energy tonight." We stepped out into the cool night, the noise from the bar muffled behind us. Arjun let out a long breath and then turned to me with a grin. "Want to go somewhere quieter?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My heart was racing, but it wasn't from fear. It was from being close to him, from the thrill of being somewhere I belonged, even if just for a moment. And in that moment, I made a choice. One that would change everything. We walked down the narrow alley behind the bar, the sounds of the city fading into the background. Arjun's hand brushed against mine as we turned a corner, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. I kept glancing at him, trying to read his expression, but his face was calm, focused. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice sounding more nervous than I intended. Arjun flashed me that easy smile of his. "There's a park not too far from here. Quiet, nice spot to talk." He glanced at me. "Unless you're ready to go home." Home. The thought of going back to my father's stern face, My mother's silent disappointment made me feel sick. "No," I said quickly. "Let's go to the park." We walked in silence for a few minutes, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement. I could feel the tension in the air, like something was about to happen. I kept thinking about how easy it would be to just reach out and take his hand, but I didn't dare. Finally, we reached the park, a small, secluded space with a couple of benches and a fountain that looked like it hadn't worked in years. Arjun sat down on one of the benches and patted the spot next to him. I sat, trying to act casual, even though my heart was pounding. So he said, turning to face me, "What's your story, Rahul?" I shrugged, unsure of how to start. Not much to tell. Just trying to figure things out, I guess. Arjun chuckled softly. "Aren't we all—" He paused, studying my face. You don't have to be so guarded with me. I'm not going to judge you." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. It's not that easy. My dad, he's not exactly the open-minded type. "Yeah, I've met a few of those," Arjun said quietly. "But that's not you, right? You're here. You're talking to me. That's something." I looked down at my hands, twisting them together. "I don't know if it's enough." Arjun reached over, gently placing his hand on mine. His touch was warm, steady. "It's a start." I glanced up, meeting his eyes. There was something in his gaze, something calm and reassuring. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. But just as I was about to say something, my phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out, seeing my father's name on the screen. For a moment I just stared at it, feeling the walls closing in again. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Arjun asked, watching me closely. I shook my head, shoving the phone back into my pocket. "No, not tonight." Arjun smiled, a slow, approving smile. "Good. Tonight's about you, not him." I nodded, trying to focus on the moment. Arjun leaned back on the bench, looking up at the stars. "You ever think about just leaving?" he asked suddenly, "getting away from all this and starting over?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Leave? Like leave Mumbai?" "Why not?" Arjun said, turning to face me again. "What's keeping you here?" I didn't have an answer. I had never even considered it. I guess. I've just always thought this is where I'm supposed to be. Arjun laughed softly. "Supposed to be? Says who? Your dad? Society? What do you want, Rahul?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What did I want? For so long, I'd only thought about what I was supposed to do, supposed to be. I looked at Arjun, searching for some kind of answer in his eyes. "I don't know," I admitted finally, "but maybe I want to find out." Arjun nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Good. That's a start." We sat there for a while, not saying much, just existing in that quiet space. The silence between us felt comfortable, like a blanket I didn't want to let go of. But in the back of my mind, I knew this couldn't last. The reality of my life was waiting for me back home, and it wouldn't be kind. After what felt like hours, Arjun spoke again, his voice low and serious. "Look, I don't know what's going on with your dad, and I'm not going to pretend to understand. But I'm here for you, Rahul, whatever you need, whenever you need it." I felt my chest tighten, a mix of gratitude and fear. I wanted to believe him, to believe that I could have this, whatever this was. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong, that this happiness was just out of my reach. "Thanks," I said softly. I really appreciate it." Arjun smiled, squeezing my hand one last time before letting go. "Anytime." We stayed there a little longer, until the chill of the night started to seep into our bones. As we got up to leave, Arjun glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. "Hey, Rahul." "Yeah." "If you ever decide you want to leave, really leave, let me know. I'll go with you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As we walked back to the main road, my phone buzzed again, but I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. By the time I got back to the apartment, the adrenaline from the night had faded, replaced by a sinking feeling in my stomach. I pushed the door open quietly, hoping to slip in unnoticed. But there he was, my father, sitting in his usual chair in the living room, a dark silhouette against the dim light from the kitchen. Where have you been? His voice cut through the silence, sharp as a knife. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. Out I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. With some friends. With friends, he repeated, standing up slowly. I could feel his eyes on me, even in the shadows. Do you think I'm a fool, Rahul? My chest tightened. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me, he snapped, stepping into the light. His face was twisted with anger. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for me to hear it from someone else? How ashamed I was when they told me. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Dad, Enough, he shouted, and I flinched. I don't want to hear your excuses. You think you can just go around, disgracing this family, embarrassing us. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm just trying to be myself. Yourself, he scoffed, his face contorting in disgust. A disgraceful son who doesn't even know what it means to be a man. What kind of self is that? His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Dad, please just listen. No, he cut me off again, his voice rising. I've had enough of this. I didn't raise you to be this. I felt my anger rising, my fists clenching at my sides. This? You mean gay, don't you? That's what you're afraid of, right? That your son might be gay. He stared at me, stunned into silence for a moment. You think I'm afraid? You think I'm afraid? You think I care what you do behind closed doors? He took a step closer, his voice low and menacing. I care about this family's reputation. I care about what people think. And you, Rahul, are ruining that. I shook my head, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. I can't change who I am. You can't stay here, he said coldly, crossing his arms over his chest. Not like this. Not if you're going to continue down this path. My heart sank. I had known this might happen, but hearing him say it out loud still felt like a blow. You're really going to throw me out? Your own son? He didn't hesitate. If you can't live by this family's values, then yes, leave. I stood there, staring at him, trying to process his words. My mother appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, her face pale and stricken. Please, both of you, stop this, she pleaded, but her voice was barely more than a whisper. No, Mom, I said, my voice breaking. If he wants me to leave, then I'll leave. I turned and stormed down the hallway to my room, tears blurring my vision. I grabbed a bag from the closet and started shoving clothes into it, my hands trembling. I could hear my parents arguing in the living room, their voices low but heated. My mother appeared at the door, her eyes red. Rahul, please don't go, she whispered. Just say you'll change. Tell him what he wants to hear. I shook my head, my chest tightening with anger and sorrow. I can't, Mom. I'm tired of pretending. I can't keep lying to you, to myself. She reached out, her hand hovering over my shoulder before she dropped it back to her side. You don't have to go, she said again, her voice breaking. You don't have to make this harder. I zipped up my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and turned to face her. I wish I could stay, but I can't live a lie anymore. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Be careful, she whispered. I nodded back, choking on my own emotions, and brushed past her. I walked back into the living room, where my father stood, rigid and unyielding. I didn't say anything to him, there was nothing left to say. I just walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the night. The air was cool and crisp, the kind of night that should have been refreshing, but all I felt was numbness. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, half expecting my father to burst through and call me back. But he didn't. The door stayed shut. I turned and started walking, my feet moving automatically, one step in front of the other. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, and I pulled it out, my fingers trembling. It was Arjun. Arjun, hey, you okay? I hesitated for a second before typing back. Me, no, I'm not okay. A moment later, my phone buzzed again. Arjun, where are you? I looked around, realizing I had no idea where I was. I just kept walking, my feet carrying me away from everything I had ever known. I typed back quickly. Me, I don't know. I just left home. There was a pause, then another buzz. Arjun, do you need a place to stay? I stared at the message, my vision blurring with tears. I hadn't cried in years, not like this. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and typed back. Me, yes, please. Arjun, I'm on my way. Stay where you are. I put my phone back in my pocket and sat down on the curb, my bag beside me. The weight of what just happened hit me like a wave, and I buried my face in my hands. I had nowhere to go, no home to return to. All I had was Arjun and a handful of clothes. And for the first time, I let myself cry, really cry, right there on the street. I cried for what I had lost, for what I had never had, and for whatever lay ahead. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. But then I heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Arjun jogging toward me, concern etched across his face. He knelt down beside me, putting a hand on my shoulder. Rahul, I'm here. You're not alone. And for the first time that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Arjun's place wasn't what I expected. When we arrived, I noticed it was a modest, single-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The walls were painted a warm shade of blue, and the place was filled with books and small potted plants. It was a far cry from the cold, sterile environment of my father's apartment, and for a moment I just stood in the doorway, taking it all in. Arjun tossed his keys on a small table by the entrance. Make yourself at home, he said casually, but there was a note of concern in his voice. I'll get us something to drink. I dropped my bag by the door and sat down on the couch, the exhaustion from the night weighing heavy on my shoulders. Arjun returned with 2 glasses of water, handing one to me before sitting down beside me. Thanks, I muttered, taking a sip. The water felt cool against my dry throat. Arjun leaned back, his arm resting on the back of the couch, his eyes fixed on me. You want to talk about it? I shook my head, feeling the sting of fresh tears in my eyes. I don't know where to start. He nodded, giving me space to gather my thoughts. After a moment, I sighed and started talking. I told him everything about my father's outburst, my mother's quiet plea for me to stay, and how I'd finally decided I couldn't keep hiding who I was. Arjun listened, his face softening as I spoke. That's a lot to go through, he said quietly when I finished. I'm sorry, Rahul. I shrugged, trying to brush it off, but the words felt heavy. It is what it is. He reached over, taking my hand in his. No, it's not. But you're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together. For the first time that night, I felt a small spark of comfort. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the day hanging between us. Finally, Arjun stood up, pulling me to my feet. Come on, he said with a smile. I want to show you something. I followed him out of the apartment and up a narrow staircase to the rooftop. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I saw a group of people gathered around a small fire pit, laughing and talking. Arjun waved to them, and a couple of them waved back. This is our little community, Arjun explained, leading me over to the group. They're all like us, in one way or another. We look out for each other. One of the guys, a tall, wiry man with glasses, stood up and offered his hand. Hey, I'm Samir, he said with a friendly smile. You must be Rahul. Arjun's told us a bit about you. I shook his hand, feeling a little out of place but grateful for the warm welcome. Yeah, that's me. A woman with short hair and a nose ring chimed in. Don't worry, we're not as scary as we look, she teased. I'm Priya. I managed a small smile. Nice to meet you. Arjun squeezed my shoulder. These guys have been through a lot, just like you. They've got stories you wouldn't believe. Samir nodded, his expression serious. We've all had our battles, but we're here now, and we're fighting for something better. Priya leaned forward, her voice low. You don't have to hide here, Rahul. Not anymore. I felt a lump form in my throat, overwhelmed by their kindness. I didn't know these people, but there was a sense of camaraderie, of understanding. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I might belong somewhere. We spent the next couple of hours talking around the fire, sharing stories and laughing more than I had in years. Arjun sat beside me, his presence a steady anchor in the sea of new faces. It was comforting, knowing he was there, that I wasn't alone. Eventually, the conversation turned to the upcoming protest against the sodomy laws in India. Samir and Priya were discussing the details when Arjun turned to me. You should come with us, he said. I hesitated, unsure. I don't know, my dad, he's already furious. If he finds out I'm involved in something like that. Arjun shook his head. This isn't about him, Rahul. It's about you, about all of us. We deserve to live our lives without fear. Samir chimed in, he's right. It's not easy, but if we don't stand up for ourselves, who will? I looked around at the group, their faces lit by the flickering flames. There was a determination there, a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt before. I took a deep breath, nodding slowly. Okay, I'll do it. Arjun smiled, squeezing my hand. That's the spirit. As the night went on, the crowd around the fire began to thin, people heading back to their own apartments. Arjun and I stayed behind, the fire crackling softly in the cool air. I leaned back, staring up at the stars, feeling a strange mix of fear and excitement about what was to come. Thank you, I said quietly, turning to Arjun. For everything. I don't know what I would have done without you tonight. He shrugged, a soft smile on his lips. You don't have to thank me. We're in this together. I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. As we sat there, side by side, I realized that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. I had lost so much tonight, but I had also found someone worth fighting for. But as the last of the fire died down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. But with Arjun by my side, I knew I had to try. The night stretched on, the city around us quieting into a deep, peaceful silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of hope flicker in my heart. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Between late-night planning sessions for the protest and early morning meetings with our small but determined group, I barely had time to think about my father or what I had left behind. Arjun and I fell into an easy rhythm. He'd make us coffee, we'd strategize over toast, and then head out to face the day. One afternoon, while we were sitting in a cramped cafe, our heads bent over a stack of flyers, Samir rushed in, his face pale. They found out, he said breathlessly. I looked up, my stomach dropping. What? Who found out? Samir sat down, glancing around nervously. Your father. He's been asking around about you, Rahul. I heard he's furious, saying you're bringing shame to the family. And he's not stopping there. Arjun tensed beside me. What do you mean, he's not stopping there? Samir hesitated, then leaned in closer. He's talking to people in the community, trying to ruin your reputation. He's even gone to the police, saying we're causing trouble, that we're corrupting people. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. But we're not doing anything wrong, we're just standing up for our rights. Try telling him that, Samir muttered. He's determined to make things difficult for us. For you. Arjun's hand gripped mine under the table. We can't let him intimidate us, Rahul. We've come too far. I nodded, but my mind was racing. I knew my father would be angry, but this, going to the police, trying to destroy our lives, it was worse than I'd imagined. What are we supposed to do? I asked, my voice shaking. Samir glanced at Arjun, then back at me. We keep going. We can't back down now, not when we're this close. Arjun squeezed my hand. We're with you, Rahul, all of us. But we need to be smart. Lay low for a bit, avoid any unnecessary attention, just until things calm down. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I can't believe he'd go this far. Arjun pulled me closer, his voice low and reassuring. He's scared, Rahul. People do crazy things when they're scared, but we won't let him win, not this time. I nodded, but my heart was heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. My father wasn't just trying to control me, he was trying to destroy everything I cared about. As we left the cafe, I kept my head down, my thoughts a tangled mess. Arjun walked beside me, his hand steady on my back, guiding me through the crowded streets. We'll figure this out, he said softly. Together. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the fear gnawing at me. What if my father's influence was too strong? What if he succeeded in turning everyone against us? Against me? The next morning, the tension in the apartment was palpable. Arjun and I moved around each other in silence, the weight of what was happening hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I'm sorry, I blurted out, my voice breaking the stillness. Arjun looked up from his spot on the couch, surprise flashing across his face. What for? For bringing all this trouble, I said, running a hand through my hair. For dragging you into this mess. If it wasn't for me, none of this would be happening. Arjun stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of me. Hey, don't do that. This isn't your fault. Your father is the one making trouble, not you. But he's doing it because of me, I insisted, frustration bubbling up inside me. Because I couldn't just keep my mouth shut and pretend. Arjun's eyes softened, and he cupped my face with his hands. You did the right thing, Rahul. You stood up for yourself for all of us. That takes courage. Don't ever apologize for that. I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch. I just don't want to see you get hurt because of me. He kissed my forehead gently. I'm a big boy, Rahul. I can take care of myself. And besides, I wouldn't be anywhere else but right here with you. I nodded, letting out a shaky breath. Okay, we'll keep going. We'll fight this. Arjun smiled, his eyes warm. That's my boy. But just as I was starting to feel a sense of resolve, there was a loud knock on the door. We both froze, glancing at each other. My heart pounded in my chest. Who is it? Arjun called out cautiously. Police, a gruff voice replied. Open up. My blood ran cold. Samir's warning flashed through my mind. Arjun moved towards the door, but I grabbed his arm. Wait, I whispered. What if they're here because of my father? He hesitated, then nodded, understanding. Stay behind me, he whispered back. He opened the door slowly, revealing two stern-looking officers standing in the hallway. What's going on? Arjun asked calmly. We received a complaint, one of the officers said, his eyes scanning the apartment behind us. You're being accused of organizing illegal gatherings and disturbing the peace. Arjun held up his hands, trying to stay calm. We haven't done anything illegal. We're just a group of friends meeting up. The officer's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. We need to search the premises. I felt panic rising in my chest. If they found the flyers, the plans for the protest, they could use it against us. Arjun squeezed my hand discreetly, a silent message to stay calm. Let them in, he said quietly. We have nothing to hide. The officers stepped inside, their eyes cold and calculating. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat as they began searching through our things, flipping through papers, opening drawers. I stayed close to Arjun, my body tense with fear. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers found a stack of protest flyers. He held them up, a smirk on his face. Looks like you're planning something big, huh? Arjun kept his expression neutral. Those are just flyers. We have the right to protest peacefully. The officer didn't seem convinced. We'll see about that. You're both coming with us for questioning. I felt my stomach drop. Arjun squeezed my hand one last time, giving me a reassuring nod. It's going to be okay, he whispered. But as the officers led us out of the apartment, I couldn't help but feel like everything was falling apart. My father's influence was stronger than I had ever imagined, and now we were caught in his trap. The fear and uncertainty were suffocating, but as I glanced at Arjun beside me, his face calm and determined, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't giving up. Not now, not ever. The police station was cold and stark, a harsh fluorescent light flickering overhead. Arjun and I were separated as soon as we arrived, each taken to a small interrogation room. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was left alone with a table, 2 chairs, and a mirror that I was sure was one way. I sat down, trying to keep my breathing steady, trying to prepare for what was coming. Minutes ticked by, stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, the door opened, and an officer walked in. He was different from the ones who had taken us. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He sat down across from me, a file in his hands. Rahul Kapoor, he began, his voice neutral. You've been quite busy lately. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. We're just trying to make our voices heard, I said, trying to sound confident. The officer smirked, flipping open the file. Organizing protests, distributing materials that could incite public disorder. Do you understand the seriousness of these accusations? I nodded, though my heart was pounding. I understand, but we haven't done anything illegal. We have the right to protest peacefully. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Your father doesn't seem to think so. He's very concerned about your activities. The mention of my father made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to keep a steady gaze. My father and I don't agree on many things. That much is clear. The officer tapped his fingers on the table. He's willing to drop the charges, if you agree to come home, stop all this nonsense. I felt a flash of anger. So this is just to scare me into submission. It's an offer, he said, shrugging. A way out for you. This could get very unpleasant otherwise. I thought of Arjun, of the group who had become my friends, my community. I thought of the nights we'd spent planning, the hope we all shared for a better future. No, I said, my voice firm. I won't stop. This is important. The officer sighed, closing the file. Very well. I'll be back. He left the room, and I was alone again, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I knew I had just refused a way out, but giving up now would mean betraying everything I stood for. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened again. It wasn't the officer this time, it was Arjun. He looked tired but unbroken, a small smile appearing when he saw me. They let you go, I asked, standing up quickly. He nodded. Same deal. They tried to scare me into backing down. I told them I wouldn't. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, relief flooding through me. What now? Arjun's smile turned into a grin. Now we fight. We show them that we won't be intimidated. We were released shortly after. The charges dropped for lack of evidence, but we both knew it was really because they had nothing on us. We walked out of the police station together, the early morning light spilling over the city. The next few days were a blur of activity. Word of our arrest had spread, and it had galvanized the community. More people joined our cause, outraged by the attempt to silence us. The protest was larger than we had ever anticipated, a sea of faces, all united for the same cause. As I stood there, looking out over the crowd, I felt something shift inside me. This was more than just a fight for our rights, it was a declaration that we would no longer hide, no longer be silenced. Arjun found me in the crowd, his hand reaching for mine. You ready? He asked, his voice loud over the chants and cheers. I squeezed his hand, nodding. Let's do this. Together we stepped forward, leading the march. The energy was electric, the air thick with chants and calls for justice. I felt alive, empowered. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid. The march went on for hours, peaceful but powerful. We made headlines, our faces and stories broadcast for the world to see. And though I knew this was just the beginning, that there would be more challenges ahead, I also knew that we had taken a crucial step toward change. As the crowd began to disperse, Arjun pulled me aside, his eyes shining with pride and something deeper. No matter what happens next, I'm proud of you, he said, pulling me into a hug. I hugged him back, my heart full. Thank you. For everything. We stood there for a long moment, two people among many, but together, united in our cause. The fight was far from over, but for now we had won a significant victory. And as we walked away from the dispersing crowd, hand in hand, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together. The aftermath of the protest was both exhilarating and exhausting. Our actions had drawn significant attention, both positive and negative. The media coverage helped to spread our message further than we had hoped, sparking discussions and debates across the city and beyond. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thrust into a new role as one of the visible faces of the movement. It was daunting, but with Arjun's unwavering support and the solidarity of our group, I felt ready to embrace the challenges that lay ahead. One afternoon, while I was sorting through a pile of outreach emails, Arjun handed me a letter that had just arrived. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from my father. Taking a deep breath, I opened the envelope. The letter was short and to the point. My father wrote about his disappointment and his initial inability to understand my choices. However, he also mentioned that seeing me on the news, speaking passionately about our rights and the injustice we faced, had forced him to reconsider his views. He admitted he was still struggling to fully accept my identity, but he expressed a desire to try to understand better, to perhaps mend the rift between us. I sat back, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. It was not an apology, not entirely, but it was a start, a small crack in the wall he had built around himself. Arjun watched me carefully, waiting for my reaction. "What are you going to do?" he asked gently. I thought for a long moment, my eyes reading the last lines of the letter. "I'm going to meet him," I finally said. "I don't know if it will change anything, but I have to try." Arjun nodded. "I'll come with you if you want." I smiled, grateful. I think I need to do this alone. "But thank you." The meeting was set for a quiet cafe, neutral ground. As I sat waiting for my father, my nerves were taut, a mix of anticipation and fear churning in my stomach. When he finally arrived, the look on his face was one I hadn't seen before, tentative, unsure. We talked for hours, circling around each other at first, but gradually opening up. He listened as I shared my experiences, my hopes, and my fears. I listened as he spoke of his upbringing, his rigid beliefs, and his recent reflections. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, moments when I thought the fragile truce would break. But we both held on, driven by a mutual, if cautious, desire to understand each other. By the end of our meeting, nothing was resolved definitively, but something had shifted. We agreed to keep the lines of communication open, to continue this difficult conversation. As we parted, my father hugged me, a clumsy, awkward embrace, but an embrace nonetheless. Walking away from the cafe, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. The path forward was uncertain and undoubtedly filled with challenges, but it was a path I was now hopeful about. In the days that followed, Arjun and I, along with our group, worked to leverage the momentum we had gained. We organized more events, participated in panels, and collaborated with other activist groups. The fight for rights and recognition was ongoing, but we were making progress, step by step. One evening, as Arjun and I sat on the rooftop, looking out over the city that had become the battleground of our lives, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. "You know," I said, turning to him, "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Arjun smiled, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "And I wouldn't have wanted to do it without you." We sat in silence for a while, just taking in the view. The city was calm, the harsh contours softened by the distance, a reminder of how much we had been through and how far we had come. As the night deepened, I leaned my head on Arjun's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The road ahead was long, but we were ready for the struggles, for the triumphs, for everything in between. Together we watched the skyline, a tapestry of light and shadow, a symbol of our shared journey. In that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together, with courage, with love, and with the unwavering belief that change was possible. Months had passed since the day of the protest, and life had settled into a new rhythm, one punctuated by advocacy work and deeper engagement with our community. The dynamic within our group had grown. We were not just a collection of activists, but a tightly knit family, driven by shared experiences and a common goal. One brisk morning, as the first hints of autumn tinged the air, Arjun and I prepared to attend a major conference aimed at LGBTQ rights, a culmination of all the efforts and progress we had made. This event was special not just for its size, but for the legislative impact it hoped to achieve. As we walked through the bustling corridors of the conference center, I felt a familiar flutter of nervous excitement. This was our chance to push for concrete changes, to advocate for policies that would protect our community nationwide. Arjun squeezed my hand, his reassuring presence grounding me as we made our way to the main hall. The conference was a blur of speeches, workshops, and networking. I found myself in the middle of it all, sharing our story, the challenges we faced, and the victories we had won. It was exhilarating to see the interest and support from a diverse audience, from policymakers to fellow activists. As the day drew to a close, Arjun and I found a quiet spot outside, a small garden tucked away from the noise. We sat on a bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. "Do you think we made a difference today?" I asked, leaning back against the bench. Arjun looked at me, his eyes thoughtful. "I think we did. It's slow, but every conversation, every session, it adds up. Change is happening, Rahul. We're part of it." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. It's hard to believe how far we've come. "And how far we'll go," Arjun added, reaching over to lace his fingers through mine. Together. We sat in silence for a moment, taking in the beauty of the evening. It was moments like these that I cherished the most, the quiet, reflective pauses amidst our relentless pursuit of change. As we got up to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my father. "Over the past months, Our relationship had slowly, painstakingly started to mend. He had begun to take an interest in my work, asking questions, trying to understand. His message tonight was brief but filled with significance. Dad saw the news about the conference. Proud of you. A warm rush of gratitude and relief washed over me. It was not perfect, our relationship, but it was healing. It's my dad, I said, showing Arjun the message. Arjun read it and smiled. Looks like you're changing more than just laws. Seems like it, I replied, a sense of accomplishment settling in my heart. We walked back to the conference center, ready for the evening panel. As we entered the hall, hand in hand, I felt a surge of optimism. The road ahead was undoubtedly filled with challenges, but it was also ripe with potential. The panel discussion was vibrant and inspiring, with voices from across the spectrum sharing their insights and hopes for the future. As I took part, articulating our vision and our demands, I felt a powerful sense of agency. After the panel, as attendees came up to talk, to thank us, or to share their stories, I realized how interconnected our lives were, how each story added strength to the tapestry of our community. Later that night, as Arjun and I lay in bed, the events of the day replaying in my mind, I felt a profound connection to the world outside our window. The city lights flickered like stars, a mirror of the stars above, and I felt anchored, at peace. I used to feel so alone, I whispered to Arjun, who was watching me with a soft expression. You're not alone anymore, he replied, pulling me closer. You never will be again. And as I drifted off to sleep, surrounded by Arjun's warmth and the gentle rhythm of the city, I knew he was right. We had faced darkness, fought against shadows, and we had emerged not just unscathed but stronger, together. The journey was not over, it might never be, but as long as we walked it together, as long as we kept fighting for what was right, I knew we would continue to make a difference, to change the world one step, one heart, one mind at a time. This was our life, our battle, our love, a never-ending story of courage and hope.